All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Now, in Musts, we talk about making the Filipino global. How do we do this? And how do we know that the Filipino is already of global caliber? Our guest today has extensive exposure to making the Filipino truly global. She is the project director of the Philippine Skills Framework and is a focal person for the Skills Up Next projects of the DTI. Her passion and commitment to manage and execute effective operations while ensuring a strong link between national policies and regional and local concerns have earned her the Woman Leader Award and Ulirang Ina Award for Government Service. Joining us in this conversation today is the Executive Director of the Department of Trade and Industry, Philippine Trade Training Center, Miss Nelly Nita Dillera.
Hello. Good
Hi.
afternoon. Good
Hello,
afternoon,
good
Joanne.
afternoon. It's great to meet you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me in the show. Thank
And
you.
thank you for joining us. Now, in your profile, it was mentioned that you also initiated the curriculum reform, focusing on business functions based on a skills framework. Can you share with us what the Philippine Skills Framework for Human Capital Development is all about, and why are we doing this?
Yeah. Okay. Let's start with the Philippine Skills Framework in general. Actually, this resulted from an MOU that was signed by the Philippines and Singapore. I think way back in that was in 2019. The Philippines
Mhm.
was represented by the Department of Trade and Industry and TESDA, and Singapore was actually represented by Skills Future Singapore. And the very objective of that MOU was it's actually focusing on human capital development, and we saw the Singapore skills framework as something that we need if we were to move forward. We need to if we are seeing moving forward the skills and competency of our workforce. And I think it was really very timely because immediately after 2019 was the time when we had the MOU, and 2020 was the pandemic. And I'd like to see the pandemic as in a positive light, because we were able to gather the different government agencies that are looking at how we can move forward the reskilling and upskilling of the Filipino workforce. And that project, the skills framework, was actually something that we wanted to look into, consider.
Mhm.
And yeah, the skills framework, just maybe for the information of everyone, it's actually composed of different components or different elements. We have career pathway or career map. Of course, when we talk about the career map, we're actually imagining the organizational structure, the entry level up to the highest position, the C-suite. Or we're also looking at different sub tracks. And when we're talking about its position in the career map, in the Philippine Skills Framework, where also each box or each position also corresponds to a particular skills map. And when we talk about the skills map, that skills map also offers us the job description, the critical functions, as well as the key tasks. So if we are coming from a company, or if we're a manager, a human resource manager, we look at the Philippine Skills Framework as something very helpful, because the organizational structure and even the job description is already there. And even,
Mhm.
what you expect from a particular position, from a particular person who's applying for a particular position is already there. Now, if you're using your lens as a worker, it's also very useful, because if you are, targeting to become, or to go up the ladder vertically, or you wanted to go from one track sub track of a particular industry to another, that can
Mhm.
also guide you, because that another document that the Philippine Skills Framework has is the skills and competency. So it's actually listed down. So I mean, if you're a worker, if you're in the workforce and you're considering if you're eyeing for a higher position, then assessing yourself in terms of skills and competencies that are in the framework will already tell you whether or not you're ready, or yeah, whether or not you're ready for the position. So
Okay.
basically, that's it. Again, the skills and competency framework also has its proficiency level, so that the same position, a particular position may be the same, but the level will be different in terms of
Mhm.
teaching our workforce, because it can be entry level up to the highest level. And in addition, Joanne, just to close the elements, another element of the skills framework is the yeah for a while. Okay, and another importance of the skills framework is actually the proficiency level of the skills and competencies is actually very useful to training institutions who would like to
Mhm.
develop their curriculum and who would like
Okay.
to develop their modules, because in it,
Mhm.
the proficiency level can already be the basis of the learning outcomes, the objectives of that particular module. And all we have to do is tap an expert who can provide content, guided by
Okay.
what's included in the proficiency level of the skills and competencies. Quite a
Okay.
bit, but it's actually the coverage of the skills framework. That's why we have always been saying that this is really very useful to
Mhm.
managers, to HR managers, to the
Yeah.
workforce, to the training institution, the government, which is looking at how we can have a unified language in terms of skills
Mhm.
development, and also what programs would be most appropriate for all of us, not only a number of agencies to support. Kasi
Mhm.
the skills framework, as we have always been mentioning, is actually supported by 10 government agencies that are looking into the development of the skills, the workforce particularly.
Okay. Thank you for that. Now you mentioned no, this is a great tool. And it's very interesting how all this data is already available. No, is this can this be accessed for free, or where
Yeah,
do we access this?
Yeah, actually, Miss Joanne, we have
Mhm.
already completed, I think, a total of 5 Philippine Skills Framework. Because as I was
Okay.
saying early on, we're referencing this on Singapore Skills Framework, but we are not copying, because the
Yeah.
situation there is very much different from the situation here in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
However, when we talk about the skills, I think it's encompassing. The skills that we learn here in the Philippines may also be, the same, especially if we're looking at really moving forward. Globalizing the workforce, or the skills of the workforce. I think it's also very much applicable anywhere, no, anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's really very useful to all of us.
Okay. You also mentioned na we based it on Singapore's framework. Why Singapore?
Um, Basically because I think um, the only reason, or one reason, sorry ha, medyo may mga nangyayari dito sa paligid ko, kaya
It's
medyo
okay. It's
nadidistract.
okay.
Okay, one thing, okay, actually it emanates from the signing of the MOU between the Philippines and Singapore. We
Oh.
saw that it's already in place. The Singapore skills framework is already in place.
Mm-hmm.
We've studied, first of all, we've studied its applicability in the Philippines. So as I was mentioning also early on, that wherever we are in the world, the skills that we're learning for a particular sector, subsector, or industry may be the same. But in terms of application, it actually depends on the country where you are in. So what I'm saying
Mm-hmm.
is, if Singapore is advanced in terms of skills, supply chain and logistics, such that the skills that they may be learning will be already on level 4 or level 5, the Philippines may also be very good in terms of other skills, say for example animation or game and
Yeah.
development. So the creative
Mm-hmm.
industry is one thing that the Philippine workforce is also very proud of. So in terms of that, the application of the skills the skills, from country to country would differ, but in terms of, the contents that we teach our workforce may actually
Mhm.
be very much different, the same. Okay, and another thing, Singapore has been doing this for, they actually prepared the Singapore Skills Framework for 10 years. It actually
Mhm.
took them 5 to 10 years to develop the different skills framework for the different sectors. And they spent, millions of dollars, Singapore dollars, to prepare those skills framework for the different sectors. Now, for the Philippines, I think we're actually cutting short. It's not shortcut actually, but we're already having these references, and even the cost is not that high because it's already there. So all we have to do, the process that we adapted is actually contextualize and validate it. So when we talk about contextualization, we tap no less than the industry players in the Philippines, okay, to
Mhm.
contextualize it, unpack it from the Singapore Skills Framework, contextualize it according to the Philippine situation. And there were also validators coming from the industry. Well, not only industry, because when we talk about industries are human resource or the managers, but we also invited people from the workforce, people from the training institutions, from the
To
government
make
and
it
all that, so
relevant.
that we can develop something that's really very, extensive and very Filipino.
Okay. Now, along the years, no, we've had new kinds of professions come up. No, may mga bloggers na ngayon, di ba? How can the PSF, the Philippine Skills Framework, no, be a long-term solution to the evolving workplace demands, especially now that we are in the age of Industry 4.0, where everything changes so fast?
Ah, okay, that's a very good question. Ano, kasi in fact, even as in PTTC is also looking at how we can update, how we can be relevant, and how can we be responsive to the sector's requirements. So, for the Philippine Skills Framework, we're actually looking at, the most, or the most or the minimum is updating it every 2 years or as need arises. Because as you can see, during the pandemic, you don't have to wait for 2 years for us to update the contents, the curriculum, or even the modules that we have. Because again, it depends upon the situation. If the situation
Mhm.
calls for us to update it, then we have to do it. What we're actually looking at is that since in the skills framework, we're identifying the emerging skills, we're also identifying the skills in demand, or the skills in the industry that are hard to supply. Those are some of the considerations that we look at, anticipating what changes or what improvements we would be including when we update the Philippine Skills Framework. But again, for the Philippine Skills Framework, it always starts with sector information. So there's an updating of the situation for the particular sector, and the needs, the gaps that needs to be addressed, whatever the situation is in a particular area. For the Philippines, those are considerations that we have to consider for us to update when we are updating the skills framework. We're just in the initial steps right now, developing skills framework. As I was saying, we've just developed 5, and we hope that when we reach 2 years, or even before that we reach 2 years, we are already thinking about how to update for it to become relevant and really responsive to the requirements of the times. Thanks, Joanne.
All right. Just to wrap up now, I've noticed that we had numerous outstanding Filipinos who are already working in the global arena. Is that, at least, no, is that an indicator that the Filipino has already successfully entered the global arena? And what do you think is next for the Filipino?
Okay. Yeah. I think what should also be considered is that what areas or what sectors are the Filipinos involved in, as far as
Mhm.
the global market is concerned, the global workforce is concerned. Um, if these are, highly technical, if these are, something like that. These are things that we also need to consider before making any conclusion whether or not we are
Yeah.
globally, the workforce, Filipino workforce is already globally competitive. But I'd like to
Mhm.
believe that there are certain sectors that the Filipino is in the lead. Like, for example, creative industry. We've
Yeah.
actually been, the BPO, a lot of companies abroad have actually been looking for Filipinos, or running after the Filipino workforce to be part of their
Mhm.
team. So that's one. I think even the health industry, those in the health and wellness industry, things
Yes.
like those. But for the Philippine Skills Framework, since this is, the skills and competencies that we're looking at right now, and we wanted to develop among the Filipino workforce, is not just something that the Filipinos prepared, but it's Singapore, and it's also, it's all. I think Singapore has also been working with Australia, with New Zealand, and other countries
Mhm.
of the world. So what we're saying is that the skills and competencies that are included in the skills framework are something that are, directed towards making our workforce globally competitive.
Yeah.
And if we are to provide these training programs to our Filipino workforce, training programs that are aligned with the skills framework, and
Mhm.
for them to be able, to adapt it and implement it and apply it, I think we have, an edge. I mean, we can have an edge in
Yeah.
terms of competing internationally.
Thank you for that, Edie Dillera.